Welcome to the Essential Skills Data Analysis review for Integrated 1. On this first screen, much like the one for linear regression, we have the things that you need to know how to do. So go ahead and take a minute and read these to yourself. All right, moving on to our first slide. We're going to be able to describe distributions. I'm going to go ahead and do this as a comparison of distributions as well. So the first thing that we need to do when we're trying to describe them, so we've got shape, center, spread, outliers. The shape is really in charge of almost everything here, except for the outliers. You should be able to see those if it's a modified box plot. A histogram is very difficult to see. So we're just going to talk with shape first. So if we take a look, I've got two of these here. I gave you some context as well. And I went ahead and labeled my axes. Very, very, very important. Just having a histogram doesn't do us any good unless we know what the x and the y-axis actually represent. So I would say that these are my hypothetical quiz scores from two classes. And then the frequency tells you how many things are actually inside that bar. So if I take a look at this, I'm going to go ahead and try to fit like a curve over each of these. Just kind of follow the trend of this. So I'm going to take a look at the one on the left-hand side. Now the one on the left-hand side looks like it's got like a single peak kind of pretty close to the middle, and then it tapers off down both sides. So if I have a single peak in the middle and it kind of tapers off down both sides, maybe not perfectly, it does look like it is symmetric to me, or roughly symmetric. So that means that there should be like a middle point where the left and the right hand side would kind of match up. Maybe not perfectly. So here for shape, I would say that this guy is symmetric, or roughly symmetric. Probably not perfectly symmetric, but pretty close. And then my next one over here, this one does not look symmetric. It definitely looks taller on one side than it does on the other. So I think about it as a slide. Now with a symmetric graph, you can climb to the top in the middle and slide either way. Whereas with this guy, it's like I have a set of stairs on the right-hand side, and then once I get to the top, I can slide down towards the left. So my slide looks like it's going towards the left, but it does look like a slide in a specific direction. So I would say that this graph is skewed. Now, the shape itself, when we're comparing them, they don't have to be the same. They can be, but they don't have to be. So if a graph is symmetric compared to a graph that is skewed, when we start talking about center and spread, the skewed kind of takes over. So it takes control, only because it has limitations that the symmetric graph does not have, which we're going to take a look at on the next slide. Okay, so I gave you a little bit more data here. So I know, I'm just going to go ahead and write down what I had here. So I know that this guy was skewed. So just as a reminder, I know that this one was skewed. I also know that the first one was symmetric. All right. Now, when I'm trying to compare these, like I said just a second ago, the skewed graph is definitely more limited when it comes to what is appropriate for center and what is appropriate for spread. So if we take a look back at the skewed graph, I would say that the only appropriate measure of center for this guy would be median. And its buddy for spread is IQR. So we're going to find those in just a minute. Now for the other one, you could have used mean and standard deviation, or you could use median and IQR. So the symmetric graph has a lot more freedom to it. If you're going to use mean as the center, though, it gets paired up with standard deviation. Doesn't make any sense to like cross group these. But if I'm comparing these, I need to be able to compare like measures together. So if the skewed graph can only use median and IQR, and I'm comparing these, then the symmetric graph must use median and IQR. So I'm going to cross off mean and I'm going to cross off standard deviation. Although it's appropriate for this specific histogram, if I am comparing them, I can't use two different measures of center. That's not appropriate. So now I want to be able to identify what these measurements are. So if you take a look at these graphs, I added a little bit more information in for you, and it is the 5-number summary. So in parentheses next to each one of the histograms, you have a couple of things identified for you. So, and the order goes the exact same order that would show up on your calculator. So the first number would be the minimum, the second number would be quartile 1, the third number is the median, the fourth number is quartile 3, and the fifth number is the maximum. I can now extract the median directly from the 5-number summary. So down here on my symmetric graph, I would say that my median is 9. Now my IQR, that is the difference between Q3 and Q1. Keep in mind that IQR is a distance or a range between things, which means when you subtract them, you got to make sure that it's the bigger number minus the smaller number. So in this case, my Q3 was 11.85 minus my Q1, which was 7.05, which I can go ahead and subtract, and that gives me 4.80 or 4.8. So I've gone ahead and identified my center, which is my median, and my spread, which is my IQR, for my symmetric graph. Now, let's go ahead and do the skewed graph. You can do the exact same thing. So the first number is going to be the minimum, then Q1, then the median, then Q3, and then the maximum. So if I go ahead and grab that information, it looks like the median is 12, and Q3 is 14, minus my Q1, which is 9, which is equal to 5. So now, once I take a look at these, I can actually do a little bit of explanation. So comparing the medians, it looks like the blue scores actually had a higher center. So I would say that period 4 has a higher center than period 1. And then it looks like that the IQRs are pretty comparable. They're almost identical. And I would say period 4 and period 1 have approximately the same measure of spread. So I have identified and compared my center and spread together. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do, we've already done shape on the previous, we just did center and spread. The next one is going to be outliers. So if we take a look at the next screen here, outliers are only going to be obvious if you have a modified box plot. So you'll notice that I went ahead and put a box plot here for each one of these. So now kind of going along with my color coding, I used my 5-number summary on the previous page, and you'll notice it didn't matter how high or how low I put the modified box plot, but it did matter that it lined up with the appropriate locations. So I went ahead and put them where they belong in comparison to where the x-axis is located. So all of those locations match up relatively with where my 5-number summary was located. So just as a reminder, you'll notice that there are no dots off to the side of this. Those dots would be my outliers. So this is the minimum. There's Q1. The little line is the median. Q3 is the end of the box, and since there are no outliers, the very end would be the maximum. Now I can take a look at the two of these, so the one on the left-hand side and the one on the right-hand side, and it looks like I don't have any dots off to the side. If I had dots, then those are my obvious outliers. So since I don't have any, I would say neither period 1 nor period 4 had outliers. Okay, moving on. All right, so now we need to be able to actually do a modified box plot on our own calculator, and then we're going to go ahead and transfer that information down here. We want to then determine which measure of center and spread is appropriate and explain why. So in orange, I went ahead and identified my how-tos in my calculator. So I would go to Stat Edit, and then enter all of these numbers into my L1 list. Once they've been put into my L1 list, then I actually need to make sure that I turn the stat plot on. So that would be second y equals. Then once you're in there, go ahead and choose plot 1. Make sure you turn it on if it's off. And then choose the modified box plot. Notice that it's got those 3 little dots off to the side, or the dots off to the side. Identify that your X list is in L1, so be clear in where you put it. And we want frequency to be 1. After that, go ahead and quit out of the screen, and then we're going to go ahead and zoom 9 this, and then make sure you push the trace button. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pause this, and I'm going to fill in what was on my calculator. I highly recommend that you do the same thing. So pause right now, type the numbers in, follow all of the steps, and see if you can recreate the same thing that I do. Okay, so after creating my modified box plot, remember we want to make sure that it's the box plot with the dots off to the side, this is what I got. There are a couple of things to note here. I went ahead and I created a number line where every single number is equally spaced. So I decided to go by increments of 1. So each one of the grids on my graph paper is 1 unit. I wanted to make sure that I had the very beginning, and I wanted to make sure that I had the very end. And then I went ahead and I identified the locations exactly as they showed up on my calculator. But my modified box plot isn't done yet. Remember, I need to make sure that everything has context on it. So I am going to go ahead and take this information up here about what this is, and I'm going to identify that on the bottom of my x-axis, or of my axis itself. So make sure that you identify what this means. So this is number of sick days used per employee. So context is definitely important. All right, so there I have my modified box plot. Now I'm supposed to be able to determine which measure of center and spread is appropriate. I'm not going to tell you what they are. That wasn't really the point here. It is which one am I supposed to use. So my options here are I can do mean and standard deviation, or I can do median and IQR. Now, I have to determine which one of these is appropriate. Well, I think we need to talk about how are you supposed to know which one you're supposed to use. When you have a modified box plot, being able to determine shape of the distribution is very, very difficult. And actually, sometimes the modified box plot looks like it would be symmetric, but if you take a look at the histogram, it's not. So in this case, we're going to use just the existence of outliers. So for mean and standard deviation, I would like no outliers at all. For median and IQR, outliers are okay. So when I take a look at just this modified box plot, if I see outliers, mean and standard deviation aren't even an option. That's a big no, it gets thrown out the window. But if it's median and IQR, then outliers are okay. And again, at this point, if you choose to take AP statistics or statistics in college, they're going to fine-tune things for you. We're just kind of getting our toes wet right now. So since I see the existence of an outlier, I am definitely going to go with median and IQR. So definitely using median and IQR, and I'm just going to state that here. So I would say use median and IQR. And my reason is since the modified box plot or since the data includes an outlier. And that's my reason. And that finishes this video. Hope it helps.